Italy, 1452. In a small village near Florence, a child is born into a world obsessed with names, bloodlines, and status. He has talent, curiosity, and potential, but none of that matters yet, because he is illegitimate. Born outside marriage to a wealthy notary and a peasant woman, the boy enters life already marked by limitation. No family title, no formal inheritance, no direct path into the professions reserved for respectable men. In Renaissance society, legitimacy was currency, and Leonardo had none. He was not expected to lead, not expected to study, not expected to matter. But history has a habit of misjudging its outsiders, because the child they dismissed would grow into a man who painted the most famous face on earth, a man who designed flying machines centuries before airplanes, a man who dissected corpses in secret to understand the mechanics of life, a man who studied rivers, storms, muscles, war, light, architecture, birds, mathematics, and emotion, as if all knowledge belonged to one language. He was called painter, inventor, and a genius. But those words came later. First, he was simply a boy the world underestimated. This is not the story of a Renaissance icon. This is the story of an outcast who taught the future. This is Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo grew up in the countryside around Vinci, surrounded not by libraries, but by landscapes. This mattered more than anyone realized, because while other boys were trained in grammar, Latin, and religious doctrine, Leonardo was studying something else: reality. He watched water move around stones. He observed birds tilt against the wind. He noticed how tree branches divided, how shadows changed with time, how clouds formed patterns before rain. To most people, these were ordinary things. To Leonardo, they were clues. He was fascinated by movement. How does water spiral? How does a wing lift? How does a smile form? These were not childish curiosities. They were the early questions of a scientific mind. And because he lacked advanced classical education, he developed a habit that would define his life. He trusted observation more than authority. If a book said one thing, but nature showed another, Leonardo followed nature. That instinct would make him brilliant and difficult, because societies built on tradition rarely welcome those who test it. Still, as a child, none of that mattered yet. There was only a boy, a notebook, and a world that seemed full of hidden mechanics waiting to be understood. As Leonardo's talent became impossible to ignore, his father sent him to Florence to apprentice under Andrea del Verrocchio. It was one of the finest workshops in Italy. And unlike modern art schools, Renaissance workshops taught everything: painting, sculpture, metalwork, mechanics, chemistry, and geometry. For Leonardo, it was the perfect environment, because he did not think in categories. He wanted to know how things worked, whether they were made of flesh, wood, water, or stone. He learned perspective, anatomy, pigment mixing, design, engineering principles hidden inside art, and quickly he stood out. A famous story tells of Verrocchio asking Leonardo to paint an angel in the baptism of Christ. When the master saw the result, he was stunned. The angel felt softer, more alive, more human than anything beside it. Legend says Verrocchio never painted again. Whether true or not, the message is clear. A new level of talent had entered Florence, but genius arrived with a flaw. Leonardo was slow, painfully slow. He revised endlessly, obsessed over details, delayed completion, and abandoned projects when new ideas distracted him. Even in youth, the pattern had begun. His imagination moved faster than execution, and that paradox would follow him for life. Florence celebrated beauty, Milan valued power, and Leonardo understood the difference. When he moved to Milan in the 1480s, he did not introduce himself as a painter. Instead, he wrote a letter to Duke Ludovico Sforza, listing what he could build: portable bridges, fortifications, war machines, canals, engineering solutions for siege warfare. Only at the very end did he add, "I can also paint." That single line reveals everything. Leonardo never saw himself as only an artist. Painting was one skill among many. In Milan, he was finally given room to think bigger. He designed systems to redirect rivers. He planned ideal cities with cleaner streets and better sanitation. He imagined armored vehicles resembling tanks. He sketched flying devices inspired by birds. Most of these inventions were never built. Some could not yet be built. But Leonardo's notebooks were not factories. They were laboratories of possibility. He was designing for a world that did not exist yet. Then came one of his greatest commissions, a colossal bronze horse honoring the Sforza dynasty. Leonardo studied horse anatomy obsessively: muscles, balance, movement, tension. He created a giant clay model, admired across Milan. For weapons, the horse was never cast. Another masterpiece lost before it was born. And then came the Last Supper. Rather than paint a calm religious scene, Leonardo chose the moment Christ announces betrayal. Shock spreads across the table. Hands rise. Faces harden. Questions ignite. Every apostle reacts differently. Fear, anger, confusion, denial. It was not just painting. It was psychology on a wall. But once again, Leonardo experimented with materials. And once again, innovation came at a cost. The mural began deteriorating within years. Even his masterpieces carried the mark of unfinished perfection. Leonardo had a rare problem. He could see too much. Most people choose a path and follow it. Leonardo found 10 paths every time he looked at one. A portrait became a study of anatomy. An anatomy study became a study of mechanics. Mechanics became mathematics, and mathematics became architecture. Nothing stayed simple in his mind. That is why so many projects remained incomplete. Not because he lacked discipline, because every subject opened into another. He was not lazy. He was overwhelmed by possibility. To patrons, this was frustrating. To history, it was priceless. Because while others finished more work, Leonardo expanded more fields. He left relatively few completed paintings, but thousands of pages of ideas. Sometimes genius does not fail because it is weak. Sometimes it fails because it is too large for one lifetime. When Leonardo returned to Florence, another star had risen. Michelangelo Buonarroti young, fierce, ruthless in discipline. Where Leonardo moved like water, Michelangelo struck like stone. Leonardo was elegant, refined, endlessly curious. Michelangelo was intense, solitary, consumed by work. The city compared them constantly. Two giants, two opposite definitions of greatness. Leonardo pursued harmony, subtlety, movement. Michelangelo pursued force, anatomy, heroic struggle. They were commissioned to paint rival battle scenes in the Palazzo Vecchio. Florence watched like spectators at a silent war. Stories spread of insults and tension between them. Michelangelo mocked Leonardo's unfinished projects. Leonardo, who rarely answered publicly, felt the sting privately. Because Michelangelo represented something Leonardo struggled with: completion. Yet history would remember both. One mastered form, the other expanded thought. Civilization needed each in different ways. Among all of Leonardo's works, one would become larger than all the others combined. A small portrait of a Florentine woman. Today, the world knows her as the Mona Lisa. At first glance, the painting seems simple: a seated figure, folded hands, a distant dreamlike landscape. But nothing about it is simple. Leonardo worked on the painting for years, carrying it with him from city to city, refusing to treat it as finished. Why? Because this was no ordinary portrait. It was an experiment. He wanted to paint something artists had never fully captured: the instability of human expression. Most portraits freeze a face. Leonardo wanted movement inside stillness. He used a technique called sfumato, soft transitions between light and shadow so subtle that no harsh lines remain. Edges disappear, contours dissolve, the face becomes uncertain. That uncertainty creates the illusion people still speak of today: the smile that changes. Look directly at the mouth, and it seems faint. Look at the whole face, and the smile grows stronger. Turn away, and it returns differently. The painting does not move. Your perception does. And Leonardo understood that centuries before neuroscience existed. He knew sight was not passive. It was interpretation. That is why the Mona Lisa still unsettles viewers. It does not present a fixed person. It presents the mystery of being human, not fully readable, not fully stable, always changing under observation. The world sees a portrait. Leonardo painted consciousness. While nobles admired his paintings by day, Leonardo pursued another obsession by night: the human body. In secret, he dissected corpses in hospitals and morgues, sometimes old men, sometimes criminals, sometimes the forgotten dead. This was difficult, unpleasant, and often dangerous work. The smell of decay, the threat of disease, religious suspicion, social taboo. But Leonardo continued. Because beauty on the outside was not enough, he wanted to know structure. He peeled back layers of muscle to understand movement. He traced tendons like ropes and pulleys. He studied the spine as architecture. He examined the heart not as a symbol of love, but as a pump with valves and chambers. He even drew fetuses in the womb with astonishing sensitivity and detail. Many of his anatomical sketches would remain unmatched for generations. He was not merely illustrating bodies, he was reverse engineering life. And this reveals something essential about Leonardo. He did not separate art from science. To paint a hand accurately, he studied bones. To paint emotion, he studied facial muscles. To understand motion, he studied mechanics. To understand mechanics, he studied nature. Everything connected. This was the secret of his genius. He did not know more because he studied more subjects. He knew more because he saw that they were one subject. In 1516, Leonardo left Italy for the last time. He was invited by King Francis I of France, a young ruler fascinated by Renaissance brilliance. Leonardo was given a residence at Clos-Lucé, near the royal court. There, for perhaps the first time, he was valued not only for what he could produce, but for what he understood. The king reportedly visited him often to ask questions, to hear ideas, to be near a mind already becoming legend. Leonardo was old now. His right hand had weakened. Painting became difficult. So he turned increasingly to his notebooks, organizing decades of studies on anatomy, water, machines, architecture, and nature. His body slowed. His curiosity did not. Tradition says King Francis held Leonardo as he died in 1519. Whether literal or symbolic, the image survived because it felt true. Power, honoring wisdom, the world bowing briefly before understanding.